Well, are we living in an age of populism, a movement that is rising up against fascism? I sure as hell hope so. Rising up against pandemic treaties, rising up against government lockdowns, rising up against central bank digital currencies, tracking everything you do with your carbon footprint. You can't go visit grandma because you've driven your car too much this past month. You've used up your carbon allotment to go visit grandma. Are we doomed to repeat the authoritarianism we all experienced during the so-called pandemic or during World War II? Our next guest says we are in an age of populism. He just debated Nancy Pelosi, God help him, on the floor of Oxford Union about that very topic. Watch this unbelievable moment.
To me, populism is not a dirty word. Since the 2008 crash, and specifically the $1 trillion Wall Street bailout, we are in the populist age. And for good reason. The elites have failed. Let me address some common fallacies, some of which have been made tonight. If the motion was that demagoguery was a threat to democracy, I would be on that side of the House. If the motion was that political violence was a threat to democracy, I'd be on that side of the House. January 6th has been mentioned. A dark day for America indeed. And I'm sure Congresswoman Pelosi will agree that the entire month of June 2020, when the federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon was under siege and under insurrection by radical progressives, those too were dark days for America.
Well, that man is Winston Marshall. You might recognize him as a former band member of the group Mumford and Sons. He's got a great YouTube channel, which is exploding in popularity, which we're thrilled about. We need more truth tellers out there. That YouTube channel is called The Winston Marshall Show. I hope all of you guys who watch Redacted will go and support Winston and subscribe to the channel. And we're thrilled that Winston is joining us from London. Winston, welcome to the show.
Clayton, thank you for having me on your great show. I look forward to talking to you.
My pleasure to have you here. It's a real treat. So I have to ask you before we get into your history here and how you've really maybe come to this awareness about all of these things. How did this debate with Nancy Pelosi? How did this moment on the floor of Oxford Union come together? To me, she doesn't do anything that is against her narrative. She'll go on MSNBC in the United States. She'll go on like-minded liberal programs. So for her to sit there and watch you spew truth for 30 minutes must have been very, very painful for her.
For greater context, I'll tell you a little bit about the Oxford Union for people who don't really necessarily know about it. It's a 201-year-old tradition at Oxford University where students debate important issues of the day and they invite guest speakers in to talk. It's done almost like a mock version of Parliament, and in fact, a lot of the students who are part of the Oxford Union do go into politics. When we were given a tour around the buildings and the rooms beforehand, it's photographs of Boris Johnson and the like, and people who went on, David Cameron, people who went on to become not just politicians, but prime ministers. So I was invited maybe a couple of months before, and I was given a list of topics that I could talk on. They included environmentalism and a couple of I can't quite remember right now, but populism was the one I cared the most about. Now, populism itself, certainly before my speech, was a word or a topic that had, I think, gone out of the zeitgeist. But I do believe we are in the populist age, and that's something I touch on in my speech, and maybe that's something we could talk about today. But for me, it does seem to me, and I think this is something you cover on your show, that a lot of the political movements around the world are in opposition to or have come up against the universalism of the establishment. And it's not really a right-left thing. So, for example, in my country, in Britain, the Conservative Party have adopted the left, what has been more traditionally a progressive creed of universalism, and have become an establishment have become part of the establishment, or rather have worked against, let's say, patriotism and nation statism, generally speaking. But perhaps that's a bit more too much detail for right now. For a broad picture. So I cared about populism. I care about how the elites are disregarding people. This is everything from back to Hillary Clinton writing off everyone as deplorables, or half the country as deplorables. It's an issue that I not only do I care about, I think it's very important for everyone to try and understand this age and era that we're in, but it also frustrates me when these elites show their contempt for ordinary people. Now, back to my invitation. After I accepted the populism as the topic, about a week before, maybe 10 days before the speech itself, or 2 weeks, something like that, I found that my opposition was Nancy Pelosi. Who better personifies the establishment elite that the populist movement, specifically in America, is standing up against than Congresswoman Pelosi, who has been, of course, a congresswoman now for over 3 decades, Speaker Emerita. And so that changed considerably how I approached the whole speech. I could not do that speech without addressing her political hypocrisies. And I tried to do that in a respectful manner because it's a respectful environment. And so I tried to focus specifically on her political hypocrisy. And you can see this 2 or 3 times through my speech. I addressed those issues head on. They included, for example, the
January 6th.
January 6th. She completely ignores what happened in Portland, Oregon through June and July, which, by the way, is the 4-year anniversary of that beginning this week. Actually, so I call out, for example, I say what happened on Jan 6th was a dark day. Of course, several people were killed. Who would disagree that that was a dark day? But she was unable to condemn what happened in Portland, the federal courthouse, which was under siege, under literal insurrection. And you can find this. There's video footage of this online on YouTube, but it's buried away. But people quite literally tried to burn down the courthouse whilst officers were inside. It's horrific, these video images, and I'm surprised that it hasn't, even now, once we're out of the hysteria of that period, that it's not being readdressed. And that's something that I intend to do shortly, and go into more detail on my own channel. But that was one of the hypocrisies. I actually said to her, after I brought that up, she said, there's no equivalence between Jan 6th and what happened in Portland. And I said, but will you condemn what happened in Portland? And she looked at me blankly. Now, it's almost in that blankness that I almost sensed, did she even know what I was talking about?
Right. That was when I saw her face, I almost wondered, did she know? She's probably running back in her brain right now, thinking about Occupy Wall Street. She probably doesn't know. She doesn't know Antifa. She doesn't know because she's removed from it, right? She's not allowed to know, I guess,
or
in some ways.
From herself, because if you go back through the records, in that period, Trump was trying to set into Oregon. He was trying to send in the National Guard, and she was blocking it. She was saying no, because I think in her mind, it wasn't an insurrection and it wasn't dangerous. And just for your listeners to remind, 19 people were killed in the first 14 days of the riots of June 2020. But in her mind, she must have, it was the most, you remember the famous Chiron on CNN, mostly peaceful riots. I think it's probably her paradigm that's how she understands all that period. So actually, the record shows that she stood against Trump, sending in officers to deal with the violence and insurrection. But when I saw her at the Oxford Union, I think she memory held it for herself, that she blocked it out for herself, that she forgot what she'd been a part of. I don't think she's re-examined what happened in that period. And in fact, the Biden administration, on the anniversary of George Floyd's death a couple of days ago, it shows that they have not revisited what happened. They continue with the narrative of that whole period. I mean, again, I'm skirting through topics that we really could do whole hour or 2 hour long discussions on, and we're happy to go there with you. But I'm just trying to paint the picture for Madam Pelosi and what I was up against. I'll give further color is that we had dinner beforehand, before the debate, and I actually thought she was very nice. She gave time to all the students who wanted to do photographs. She was happy to talk to people. She was very well behaved and sweet. I think she spent the whole days talking to other politicians. She'd not been challenged on anything, but I had some interesting insight at the dinner, and I was actually sat next to her chief of staff. Conversation topics would come by, words like equity would zoom by, dogmatic positions on the environment would zoom by, and the most strange of all was the approach to the upcoming presidential election in the States, which is they genuinely believe that democracy is on the line, that democracy was what was at stake in this upcoming election, so much so that they are blind to the ways in which they are undermining democracy themselves. And so that was what was so curious, is that they're in a complete bubble. There's so much detail here that I could go off on, but another thing, I did not know going into this debate how much preparation and what her position would be. On the one hand, she could have had the cliche position on, establishment attitude towards working people in America, exactly the attitude that is best exemplified by Hillary's basket of deplorables comment. Or on the other hand, Pelosi maybe would have had a speechwriter do a robust attack on populism, because, by the way, there are perfectly legitimate attacks on populism and issues around populism that should be addressed. I didn't know what I was going to be up against. Now, it turned out I was up against the complete pastiche version of the establishment attitude towards populism. Pelosi, in her speech, used the word ethno-nationalist populism 5 times. She even made up this term ethnic negativity. What she's doing then is basically parroting the concept that half of Americans, not just whether they're MAGA or conservative, not just that they're MAGA or Republican, but also that they're conservative, are racist. And by the way, that's demagoguery. Demagoguery is to play to the prejudices of ordinary people. Pelosi and the establishment play to the prejudice of some progressive Americans that half the country are racist. She did literally that in her speech. So I was quite taken aback by that, and I tried to address some of it. I say all this to paint a little bit of a picture of my experience and what it was like with Madame Pelosi. That's kind of like a kind of opening painting for you.
Well, let's take a look at, I want to play just a few moments here of her talking about this what'd she say? What is it? Ethno-racism.
Ethnic negativity.
Ethnic negativity here. Let's take a look at this is a couple of times that she calls this out. Watch this.
In our country, we see nationalism, isolationism. We had a fight to get the bill that we got last week, and generated by an ethnic negativity about immigrants, young incumbents too, immigrants, people who are different from them, these people, and the rest.
So her argument then essentially is, if you oppose open borders in the United States, if you oppose 43 million illegal immigrants coming into the United States, taking their jobs, destroying communities, if you oppose that, then you are racist. Then you are the problem. And of course, we've heard this from Democrats. I mean, we've heard from Alejandro Mayorkas, of course, is the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, told us the biggest threat to the United States We heard this from the FBI. The biggest threat to the United States right now are MAGA white supremacists. If you're a MAGA Republican, not even to be white supremacist, but if you hang an American flag in your house, if you hang an American flag on your flagpole in your front yard because you're proud of your country, you are a big threat, and they will be watching you. So this is who she's up against. These are the people that she thinks are the greatest threat to democracy.
There's a
right?
double irony as well, because if you look at the polls, and this is according to a CNN poll from last month, the polling different minority groups in America as to how they'll vote in the upcoming US presidential election, the black vote for Trump has gone from 12 to 28%. The Hispanic vote is at 48%, and more recently someone's told me it's now over 50%. So if these people are all ethno-nationalists or white supremacists, how is it exactly how is it that we're to believe that these people who are not white are suddenly white supremacists? It's completely illogical. But back to your earlier point, this is the problem with immigration. Now, look, I happen to be pro-immigration. I've done a lot of work helping Hong Kongers to integrate into the UK. My mother's an immigrant. My girlfriend's an immigrant. I'm not against immigration. However, anyone who is to make the case for immigration needs to address the negative sides. Now, I'm not even talking about illegal immigration here. That's another topic altogether. But let's just talk broadly about immigration. Let's say all of the people coming through the southern border in the US were legal. Just hypothetically. Let's say they were legal. Even in that scenario, it is the responsibility of all politicians to address the negative sides. There is a trade-off. What are those trade-offs? Well, you've alluded to them. It's increase in crime. It's decrease in wages, especially for the working classes. Now, that doesn't affect Pelosi, whose house cleaner and gardeners will be cheaper. If anything, it's a positive for her, I imagine. But of course, for ordinary people, it hurts them. It hurts minority Americans because they're the ones who are having their wages come down and are facing the consequences of that. There's also a very important part, and we're seeing this in Britain as well, of social cohesion. People, to form a country, to form a nation, you need to buy into the same idea. You need to have the same rules. And this is why we've had issues in crime. But and since October 7th, particularly in Britain, we've seen actually there's different pockets of the country that have completely different values, completely different priorities. And this is how nations fail. There are very serious consequences with immigration. We need to address them, even if there are positives, even if it's a net positive overall to have immigration, we need to deal with the negatives, because for many people, it is not a net positive. For many people, it's actually overall bad for them on the individual level, even if it's better for a society.
And when you look at cities like Chicago, which we've covered extensively here on the show, former 24-year veteran of the Customs and Border Protection, J.J. Carroll, who has been on the show, he's working on a new documentary called Treason. He was just in Chicago, and he was speaking to all sorts of black activists who live in that area, and said they're going to war. Their community is being destroyed by illegal immigrants, those coming from Venezuela who have taken their jobs, who are armed gangs. And he said, they asked the question, who are you going to vote for? And all of them to the letter said Trump. These are Obama, Biden voters who have watched their communities be destroyed by a wave of illegal immigration, and who are being given government services and money and debit cards, giving a 3 meals a day while they're sleeping in tents across the street from illegal immigration centers. This is the hypocrisy right now, and I find it fascinating too. I mean, Nancy Pelosi's own husband was beat in the head with a hammer by an illegal immigrant. Right?
Oh, was he an illegal immigrant? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, from Canada. Was an illegal immigrant from Canada. But you're absolutely right. And I think
I'd like to make one point, and it's worth making this point, is that she was served justice for that, or the Pelosi family was served justice only last week, and that the attacker has been sentenced to, I think, over 30 years. And I think it's worth, when we get trapped in this political conversation, I'm guilty of it. Sometimes when there's people, your political opposition, or people that you really hate their politics, that you can you can forget the human side. And that's why I tried to make that point earlier, just, in my interactions with her being very nice. I actually think it's a good thing that the attacker has been sentenced and will face time, and that was an injustice. And we've got to get, I mean, I don't know if there was a political motivation behind the attack, but if there was, we should all find it easy to condemn that. We don't want that. We don't want political violence. That's a terrible thing. And by the way, we must condemn it. I'll tell you why. Because a lot of people who are anti the populist movement conflate it as a violent, attacking, evil movement that's susceptible to violence, and they'll quote Jan Sick. Now, I'll say this in response. All political movements are susceptible to violence. It doesn't matter whether it's populist or establishment. On the fringes, there are always going to be violent groups. You don't want to let the establishment conflate populism with being a violent movement. And so we must stand up and condemn it when we see any sort of political violence.
Amen. Amen. I think you're absolutely right about that. But for so many people, they have not had that experience, and Americans are watching their country being torn apart. Their police departments are being told, do not arrest these individuals. Do not go after these individuals. We can't do anything about it. And we have sources at the Chicago PD that are being told, we're being told hands off. And this gets back to the populism movement. You're seeing that it's almost like a tale of two countries right now for many Americans. They're seeing the elites, they're seeing those in Washington completely out of touch with what's happening to communities, what's happening with inflation, what's happening with the tyranny of a lockdown. It's fine for people like Nancy Pelosi to go and get her hair done during a lockdown when everyone else is told to stay home. It's fine for Boris Johnson to have parties, and when everyone else is being told you can't go see your dying grandmother at the hospital. It's a tale of it's okay for you, but not for them. Mm-hmm. And I think Americans have had enough, and it doesn't really matter Republican or Democrat. I mean, we have 100 million Americans who don't vote for either party. I believe both of them are corrupt anyway, and so the idea of the uniparty. Mm-hmm. And I think so many people are just absolutely fed up with the tyranny of the elites.
Yeah, I agree with that. And this is the point I was trying to make in the populist age. Now, I started in my speech, I link it back to the Wall Street bailout of 2008. And I would say that every president since then has been populist. Now, let me explain that, because you'll think, well, Obama wasn't populist. But actually, I do think in 2009, he was the populist option against McCain. And then again, 4 years later, against Romney, Romney was more establishment. And what Obama did was completely cave to the establishment. He buckled to Wall Street in 2009 when he came into power, and so didn't pull through on those promises that he made. I would also say that actually, Biden obviously isn't a populist, but
right, no.
How he won. There are many theories on that, and one of my theories is that Trump is so hated by a lot of Americans, be they elites or not. He is very popular, and we've seen this. We can see this on all the Trump rallies, and even in the Bronx last week. And it's unbelievable the numbers who come. I still have progressive friends who they cannot stand Trump. So it's not really Biden winning, but Trump losing. But perhaps that's a sort of side point. But I do think that in America, with the exception of Biden, this has very much been populists winning against the establishment since 2008.
I want to wind the clock back a little bit, if we can, here, Winston, for our audience, and who might know you from Mumford and Sons, who might know you as this great musician, who then left the band in response to a simple tweet. I mean, this is unbelievable to me. I remember when this happened. I'm just going to put the tweet up here on the screen. This is a tweet that you pushed and said, "Congratulations to Mr. Andy No, friend of the show, Andy No, who wrote a book called Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy." And you tweeted, "Finally had the time to read your important book. You're a brave man." And you tweeted this, I think, during the pandemic. So you were home. Touring was probably not happening at the moment, so you're reading a lot of books. You tweeted that simple tweet, and then it just exploded over the weekend, and so much so that you decided to leave the band because of the backlash. It's unbelievable to me. Can you take us back to that moment and what happened?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure your viewers will remember the hysteria of that period. Not only was the world in lockdown, and I suppose businesses were destroyed, families were squashed together, and it was just a very traumatic experience for the whole world. And on top of that, I think almost everyone was glued to their phones and venting through their phones. On top of that, of course, we had the BLM riots that began in June 2020. And in the music industry specifically, the BLM was a sacred cow. It was a religion. You could not criticize it. In fact, if you were even to ignore it and not, let's say on Black Square Tuesday, not post the Black Square, that would be seen as going against the movement. And as many of these movements are smart in doing, they have a wordplay game. So if you are against Black Lives Matter, on paper, at first glance, it would be like, oh, so you're against Black Lives Matter. That's how all these things are framed. The music industry is a very small industry, and it's very progressive, and you couldn't criticize BLM. For me to do that, which is essentially what I did, and to criticize Antifa, because the book is critical of what happened. In fact, I think it remains the only serious in-depth documentation by the journalist Andy Ngo of what happened, of the Antifa movement, and more broadly, the negative side of the BLM protests, the many deaths, the many businesses destroyed across the states. And actually, I don't think the book covers internationally, but I don't think anyone died in the UK, but certainly a lot of damage was done during the BLM riots. So the context of all this was that that's the background, rather. And so then, meanwhile, I'm having quite a peaceful lockdown. We'd been touring for well over a decade, almost non-stop. On a personal level, the lockdown came at not a bad time for me. I kind of wanted a little bit of a rest. And I was tweeting about books I was liking. I tweeted about Andy Ngo's book. I'd also previously tweeted about Mao's Little Red Book, or which I would argue is a little bit more controversial. And I'd tweeted for whatever. I think I was on a bit of a Russian kick at the time, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and stuff like that. But this book it blew up. This tweet blew up. I had 3,000 followers. By the end of the weekend, it was a segment on The View and Fox. It went up all the trending charts in my country and yours. I couldn't quite believe it. Now, if I'd been a lone actor, I just sort of would have ignored it. Is what it is. But behind the scenes, these activists, these Antifa activists, I'll give you an example of what these Antifa activists, the nights that it happened, they were trying to change my Wikipedia from Winston Marshall is a banjo player to Winston Marshall is a fascist. They were doing that throughout the night. I had a very dear friend of mine stay up and try and kept changing it, and it went back and forth like 8 or 9 times. Like, what these activists do is they swarm like hornets and try and get you wherever they can, which is mainly online. Unfortunately, they didn't just come for me. They also came for people I worked with. Not only that, the industry, there was a backlash. There was an online dogpile from other artists, including many artists that I'd worked with, which I was surprised, and let's put that as putting it sort of mildly. And there was professional punishment. Radio stations said they wouldn't play us anymore. I was dropped from a festival that I was due to DJ at. I was just taken off the bill. I wasn't even given an email notification. So there was professional punishment for my opinion. Now, I should say at the time, I felt very contrite. I was upset that I had upset not only my bandmates, but their families. there had been death threats, there had been threats to attack, not just me, but them, and I wanted to make it right. I didn't. Clearly, everyone would agree it's not fair that they should be punished for my opinions. I was also of the opinion that maybe I didn't know everything. Maybe I didn't know this whole topic. Maybe there was something about it that I didn't know, and so I was like, okay, well, I issued an apology, which I would say was under considerable duress, but I also did think that I was sorry that I had caused so much hurt to those around me, and I wanted to make it right. And I was open to the fact that I didn't necessarily know everything about the topic. So I then did, in the preceding few months, take a deep dive into this topic of BLM and Antifa. And the more I looked into it, the more it proved I was like sure I had been right. Not only that, the author, Andy Ngo, in that period was then attacked again within inches of his life, as video footage of this came out of him in Portland, Oregon, black-clad activists chasing him into a hotel. And at that point, I felt terrible because I felt like, well, I participated in the lie with this. My apologizing for promoting his book is puts me on the side of those black-clad hooligans. And so I felt terrible. After that and various other things, I decided the only way forward was for me to retract my apology and leave the band. Immediately having done that, I felt my soul return to me. I got my dignity back. It's where we went through an age, and I wonder if we've come out of it, of the kind of groveling apology. I think mine was one of those. It harks a little bit back to the sort of dunce hat scenes from Maoist China. It's humiliating, and I think by design it's humiliating. So for me, I got my sense of dignity back, which was really important, and I feel like I moved away in such a way that they would no longer be hurt by their association with me. So that was a very painful period, but I got through it. And then at that point, I still play music, but then I've just been rebuilding ever since. So it's almost 3 years between that and the Pelosi debate. In that time, I decided that now that I'd put my head over the parapet to discuss taboo topics, of which there are many, I felt like it was not just a duty, but why even have gone through all of that and then not speak my mind. So I started podcasting, started a show, and started doing more writing, covering these topics. And then about 6 months ago, launched the independent show, as you mentioned at the beginning of your show, which has been completely liberating. Oh my goodness, it's great being doing everything, being in control of your own channel and covering whatever I want. So I've actually come to a point now, 3 years later, where I feel like I've rebuilt something, which is, so I just to give you a bit of my personal story, and I'm sure your listeners are falling asleep.
No, I love it. No, I think there's a lot of similarities. You and I could have a beer or sit down and talk about this separately, because this is a lot of similarities, having worked in the mainstream media, worked at Fox News for so many years, worked in the belly of the beast in the mainstream, and then left, and being able to do our own channel. We have 5 people here that work on our team. We're a very, very small team, and no one tells us what to say. Yeah. We get banned and blocked often by YouTube and these other big tech companies, but no one's telling us you can say this, you can't say that. And it's very liberating, and it feels amazing to be able to come on the show and tell the truth based on the facts that we see. And I think that's very telling that you had that moment of reflection too, where you said, you know what, maybe I don't know everything. There's a mob mentality here that came after me. Maybe this guy, Andy Ngo, maybe this book is just propaganda. Maybe I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to read into it. I'm going to have that moment of reflection. I'm not going to be a part of this mob mentality. And then you start researching. It's like with us, with the Maidan coup in 2014 in the Donbass. And it's like, once you understand that the CIA was involved in that, and once you really understand through sourcing and materials that, no, we are correct in our position here. And then in some ways it forces you to sort of double down. Now you're going to look for, really start to do more research on this. And I think that's really, that's powerful that you took that moment of self-reflection and not just to kind of plant your flag and say, I'm correct, no matter what, I'm going to step back and go through these materials. I think more people should do that. If you're an online troll, you're these people that just immediately joins this sort of mob mentality. I think we'd be better off as a society if people were able to just take a break from social media for a day.
Yeah.
Not get their sources from CNN or the BBC. Start to read independent journalists. Start to really dive in and say, wait a second, maybe Winston was right here. Maybe I need to not be such a part of this mob mentality. I need to. I'm curious, with all the people that hate that came after you, were there people that said, thank you? Because
well, not only
were
that,
there tweets that,
not only that I had major pop stars contact me privately saying, I've actually read that book. I don't know what the fuss is about. But having said that, they do know what the fuss is about, because they would never dare opine themselves, because they know exactly what the consequences are. But then at that time also, I had hundreds, if not thousands, of messages, people saying, thank you, because we can't speak. And I wonder if we're through this period, but that period for a few years, maybe 5 or 6 years, and maybe it'll come back with vengeance if Trump wins in progressive circles, was a period of self-censorship. A lot of people, it's not just in their workplaces, it might even be in their families, that they feel like they can't broach certain topics for fear of it's derailing relations or even careers. And so, yes, that.
Yeah, people speaking out against the vaccine, people saying, and it tore families apart. Yeah. You had families ripped apart by saying, I'm not going to take this experimental thing. It's not actually a vaccine. It hasn't even been approved. I'm not going to take it. And the other family members saying, you can't come over to see grandma. How dare you? You're an anti-vaxxer. It tore families apart in the same way that Trump tore families apart. And I mean, I think now, of course, you're seeing the result of those people that said, no, I'm not putting this experimental thing in my body. And you're seeing the response now. You're seeing all sorts of COVID inquiries, Parliament investigations. Truth is now coming out about it, and these people have been vindicated. So maybe you're right. Maybe we're entering a period, hopefully post-cancellation, where maybe we won't have that again. Yeah. I hope. I hope. Well, I agree with you.
I think that's also why someone like you, Clayton, has a great responsibility, I think, to talk, is because you can do so and reach people in a way that most people can't do. And actually, a lot of that thinking is going on online. Whether it happens again, my concern is that if Trump wins the presidential election, which it seems like he's the front runner and it seems like he might, then everything we saw when he was last president, everything from Me Too to BLM, all of these things, I think were reactions to him that came out in other ways. And that would include DEI, the extra push for affirmative action stuff. I think that if he comes again, they're going to do it all over again. And it's going to be with new things that we aren't familiar with, new groups, new theories, new concepts, new, it won't be ESG anymore. It might be some new acronym that we haven't heard of. They're going to try new words. You'll notice at that time they wrote off everyone as alt-right, or there's some language which has gone because those words lost meaning because they were so used and abused that everyone realized that it wasn't real anymore. So they'll come back with new words like this. And I guess this is a question to you. Let's say Trump wins. Do you think America can survive the reaction to Trump from those who hate Trump?
Well, what I'm more worried about is them. I've said this on the show. I do not believe they will allow Trump to become president. I think that the deep state, the entrenched deep state, absolutely will not allow that to happen. So I think they will do everything they can to keep it from happening. But I think you're seeing a shift now in the United States. I've seen where there's all this discussion about civil war, but I really don't. I think that Americans, the populist Americans, are more alike than ever. And I think they agree on a variety of topics. And regardless of the color of their skin, they're seeing that I'm just like this guy. I'm just like this guy who worked in a coal plant. I'm like this guy who lost his job here in Ohio. And I think there's a lot more unity right now than the mainstream media would have us believe. And I think, I really think we're seeing the United States being torn apart in other ways. And I'm not convinced. I was at the beginning. I was really thinking we might see a civil war, but I don't believe that anymore. I think if anything, right now, it's exactly what you've been talking about. It's populism against fascism. And I think you're going to see a unity in the United States in a way that we haven't seen before. And I'm excited about it. I really don't believe they're going to let him become president. I think they're going to try to throw as many indictments, as many ways that they can keep him from being on a ballot as possible. But
Clayton, can I make a couple of remarks about populism there? Firstly, just people might not understand it as fascism, because what they understand fascism to be is to be far right. But what fascism actually is the coalition or the unity between big government and big corporation, big business. And so that is the fascism, and that's literally fascism in the Italian early 20th century sense. Now, when it comes to populism, what the establishment keep trying to do is paint everything as a right versus left, as a Trump versus Biden thing. But it's not that. It's actually an up versus down. It's establishment versus the people.
Yes.
And the right-left is a deliberate tactic to split everyone up, and it benefits the establishment. What's a really good example of this is that people, before the DNC got rid of Bernie, or rather after the DNC got rid of Bernie, 25% of Bernie supporters did not vote for Hillary. And of them, half of them voted for Trump. And I think the reason for this is a lot of the populist left and the populist right will agree on what some of the big problems are. And a great example of this is globalization. In fact, if you go back to the 1999 battle for Seattle, that was, I would say, a left-wing populist revolt in confrontation with globalization, the WTO. So today we conflate being anti-globalist as being a right-wing position, but actually there's a fine tradition of it being a left-wing position. So whether the populist movement ends up being, it could well have been a left-wing result. Bernie could have won. It could, whether it ends up being a right-wing or a left-wing movement is yet to be seen. At the moment, it looks like, certainly in America, Argentina, that the right-wing populists are doing better. But you can go to Venezuela, you can go to Mexico, you can go to Brazil and see that left-wing populism has actually done very well in some other countries. Any of these countries, whether it ends up being a right or left, i.e., what's the policy to deal with the issues that we agree on, that's yet to be seen. But we should not be divided on right or left. If we can get on the same page and say, actually, we agree on all of these issues, let's come together in good faith and try and work out the policy forward. That's the positive populism. That's what we should be aiming for. And the establishment won't have us do that. They need to split us right and left. They're trying to divide the populist movement intentionally.
Absolutely. They want us to be fighting. And I think when Trump was in the Bronx the other day, regardless of where you come down on Trump, if you're an RFK support, whatever, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But what he said, it doesn't matter what your skin color is, white, black, brown, it doesn't matter. We're all Americans. And he basically said, I don't give a rat's ass about your skin color. And I think that really struck a chord with people, saying enough is enough. We have way more in common than we don't. And you're absolutely right about up and down, up and down. It's about class. It's about the middle class and the lower class of the United States being totally squeezed out by these elites who want us to be fighting right now. I mean, I could talk to you all day. and I'll have to come to London. I'll have to get lunch. We'll have to have, you'll have to take me to a fish and chips place, your favorite spot, and we'll sit down because we could talk all afternoon, and I want to be respectful of your time. I want everyone to go and subscribe to your YouTube channel, though, the Winston Marshall Show over on YouTube, which is exploding right now. I'll have links to the full debate with Nancy Pelosi in the description below. And our apologies, we had a little static here in the interview. If you hear that, we are aware of it. But hey, hopefully we had a great conversation regardless of some of the static here. Winston, thank you so much for joining us here on the show, and I'd love to have you back here on Redacted from time to time when your schedule allows it.
Clayton, thank you, and I'd love you to come on my show.
Oh, I'd love that. I would love that.
But all the best
Absolutely.
to you, and a great privilege to be on your show. Thank you, and more power to you.
Thanks so much, Winston. And thanks to all of you for subscribing and being a part of our show, and we'll see you next time, everyone.